What is up, guys? My name is Quincy Carrier, and this is another edition of QnA, the show where I take your questions from YouTube. And of course, if you want to ask questions on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ding that notification bell so you can be notified when I post on the community tab on Thursday, 7:30 in the morning, so you can ask your question on the prompt there. Without further ado, let's get into your questions. And the first one is from Nick M, who says, I think the Browns will go 14-2. What's your season prediction for the Browns? I would say 14-2 would be a pleasant surprise. It wouldn't be a shock. It would be just outside the realm of where I think the Browns are going to go. I don't think you can necessarily expect any NFL team to go 14-2, especially one that went 6-10 the year before. But I will say that the Browns should win at least 10 to 13 games. I think that is very realistic. I mean, 10 to 12 is more, but 10 to 13, I think that range is more than likely what you'll see from this team or what you should at least expect from this team. My final prediction is going to be 11-5 so far, unless something changes during camp. But yeah, that's why I would say the Browns are going to be about 11-5 within that 10-game to 13-game range. The next question comes from Philip Wilcoxon, who says, hey, Q, let me ask you, if there was one more move you would make as the GM of the Browns, what would it be? If I were to GM the Browns, I would try to get Mike Daniels in, try to get some more veteran defensive tackles in that rotation, because I'm not sold that they're going to be able to stop the run. I would spend that energy at linebacker if there were just better linebackers available, but there just aren't. So I would rather spend that energy and get the better player versus just fill the need. So that's why I would go with somebody like Mike Daniels over some kind of replacement at the stand-up linebacking position. Also, if I could try to make a move, I would try to see if Sean Lee's available from the Cowboys. I know they just moved on to Van Der Esch, but they still have him on the roster. He's older, he's injury prone, but he's a veteran. And, you know, best case scenario or worst case scenario, you get about 6 to 8 games out of him, which would be enough time to bring along Jacob Phillips and get him adjusted to the NFL game so you have more confidence in that situation. And being that you play so many division games early on, I would like to have a little bit more experience alongside Mack Wilson. So I would try to bring in Sean Lee, and I would try to sign Mike Daniels. Not the sexiest moves, but I think just some small nuts and bolts moves that will lock up certain things on the defense that I am starting to be concerned about. The next question comes from Nick Mayfield, who says, what's good, my guy Quincy? My question is, do you think Mack Wilson and Sione Takitaki will have a breakout season? Speaking of, Mack Wilson, I think it's a good bet that he's probably going to have a good starter quality season and maybe like a fringe Pro Bowl season. I don't think he's going to have that great of a year, but I think he is going to have a good year, like a Christian Kirksey level year. As far as Sione Takitaki, I have no idea what he's going to do. He could be spectacular, and he could end up being a non-factor or a perennial special teamer. I just haven't seen enough from him from last season to have any type of confidence in how he's going to play at this stand-up linebacking position. And what I have saw was not necessarily overwhelmingly enticing. So I am a little bit worried about that. I don't know if both are going to have like huge breakout seasons, but if one does, it's Mack Wilson. But I will put the limiter on, like, I don't think he's going to be like Darius Leonard this year, but I do think he'll have like a Christian Kirksey type season, best case scenario. Next question comes from Wyatt Wyckoff, who says, hey, Quincy, I want to ask you, if we have a season, what do you think will be the hardest stretch of the schedule? Pretty much from the start of the season until November is a pretty tough stretch because you play, I believe, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati, all three at the beginning of the season. And with the whole situation going on, we don't know how this team's going to start. I think they might start off good because they're simplifying things, but again, new head coach, new offense can lead to a bad start. The reason that's important is because this team can't start off bad, because if they start off bad, they'll dig themselves in a hole that they're not going to get out of in the AFC North. You can't lose 2 of those 3 division games and expect to compete later on in the season. So That's why it's the hardest stretch right now for the Browns, because you have a lot of must-win games and a period of the schedule where it's super uncertain what it's going to look like, how these games are going to get played, how the preparation's going to go, and how much time you're even going to have on the field to be prepared for it. That's why I think it's the toughest stretch on the schedule. The next question comes from Hunter Tosh, who says, now, what do you think of the recent demands of the NFLPA regarding player safety, especially player suspensions? I mean, they're mostly reasonable. I think they're decent demands. The suspension one is one that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows. I actually agree with it. I don't see why somebody who was suspended for 4 games should miss the entire 2020 season if there is no season, and then also miss 4 games on top of the next season. I get the thinking against that is that it's a 4-game suspension and everybody didn't play, so you still have to be suspended for 4 games when everybody can play. I get that, because for most positions in the NFL, unlike basketball, unlike baseball, you can only be really good at those positions in a very small age range, right? Like once somebody hits 31 in the NFL, and if they don't play quarterback, it starts to get real questionable about if they can hold up. And if somebody did something that they deserve to be suspended for 4 games on, and they also have to miss a season and then 4 games, I just think you're taking away just too much. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of carrying over suspensions on top of like having to lose a year. I think that's punishment enough for everybody involved. But it's going to be interesting to see how these talks with the NFLPA and the NFL go, because we're like 10 days away from training camp supposed to start, and I just don't think they're anywhere close to agreeing to something that's going to lead to this being quote-unquote frictionless. I just don't see it. The next question comes from Colt Linder, who says, do you think Myles Garrett will break the single-season sack record? Ooh, that's a hell of a prediction. But I think Myles is going to have a good year. I think people are going to expect now that Myles has at least 13 sacks. And I think probably a high end on that guess would be 17. And I do think it's possible for him to get 20, because there's just this defense as it's structured right now is going to rely on him to do all the production when it comes to getting sacks in this defense. And I could see a situation similar to what Shaq Barrett did in Tampa Bay, where this guy gets like 20-plus sacks because there's just nobody else there. Same thing with Chandler Jones in Arizona. So I can see that situation. I will say you're going to want to have Myles Garrett for this defense's health to be around 13 to 17 sacks. If he starts to have to get like 17, 18, 19, 20, but I will say, if he starts to get above that, right, to that 19, 20, that's not generally good for the rest of the defense, right? When somebody has a ridiculous amount of sacks and they're the only one getting sacks on that defensive line, it's not good. I mean, you look at Chandler Jones in the Arizona defense, not something you want to mimic. And I do worry about that. Like if Myles Garrett does break the single-season sack record, I would worry that that might be a case of just nobody else being able to produce and being able to get in the backfield other than Myles Garrett, so he's just taking up a disproportionate amount of the sacks. There could be a scenario where he's just part of a dominant defense and getting those sacks, but if you look at the dominant defense last year, San Francisco, their leading sack getter was like 9 or 10. I think they had like 3 guys in that 9 to 10 range, and then like somebody at like 7, 6. It was really spread out because they had dominant play up there. And then you have a situation like Arizona where Chandler Jones gets a ridiculous amount of sacks, but it's because he's the only person there that can get a sack on that defense that's any good. So I do worry about that. I'm concerned about that. I'm going to watch that, but I do think it's possible he breaks the single-season sack record. I wouldn't expect it, though. The next question comes from RTR, who says, a quiet but I think underrated addition to this team was Andy Janovich. Do you have any thoughts on how the fullback is being used this year? Yeah, I think the fullback will be fun. I think he'll be a real fun addition, at least for the fans. Fullbacks are usually more fun for fans than they are useful to teams nowadays. So I get why people love fullbacks, and I get why fullbacks have the tendency to sometimes get overrated. But I think Andy Janovich would be a fun addition to the team. I think he'll help in some areas. I think Nick Chubb with the fullback, It's a pretty good idea. I think there will be some benefits. And, I don't think the negatives are that high when it comes to Janovich. And I think he is the closest thing to an actual fullback this team has had since, Lawrence Vickers in the 2010s? So it'll be interesting to see there. The next question comes from Hunter F., who says, hey, Quincy, do you think the Browns are a legitimate playoff contender, or will they lose their playoff spot to a team like the Broncos or Colts? If they do lose their playoff spot to a team like the Broncos or Colts, that is a massive disappointment. That is underperforming expectations yet again. They should be a legitimate playoff contender. If any other franchise on the planet Earth had the roster the Browns had, there'd be no way you would get away with saying this team should not expect to make the playoffs. It's only because the Browns have a history of disappointing that many people are kind of being a contrarian to that take. But the reality of the situation is this roster is too good to not make the playoffs, and for anything that's not making the playoffs to be excusable, quite frankly. It's just not. If you're giving yourself anything less than playoff expectations, you're doing not only yourself but the team a disservice, because it's not going to be helpful if this team goes 8-8 or 9-7 but misses out in the wild card, and we're out here giving high fives and pat on the backs. That's a disappointment. That's underperforming. That's not good, and that's well under what this team is capable of being, and it's celebrating something that the team should really look at and evaluate why they aren't better, because if they can't make the playoffs, you have to ask that, especially with the extra seat. What is wrong here? Something has to be wrong, because it's not the roster. And if it is the roster, something has to be adjusted. What position is that? Serious questions have to be asked if this team does not make the playoffs. And I don't think setting expectations underneath the playoffs is helpful in any way. The next question comes from Giants Nation. It says, Quincy, what's up? Hope you're living your best life. My question is, what do you think about Washington and the Cleveland Indians changing their names? I think with Washington, that's a long time overdue. I mean, if anybody has watched me talk about Washington on this channel or in life, I don't say their name because I have understood it to be offensive to Native Americans, because it was told to me by Native American people that it's a very offensive term, and it's something that they don't want to hear. And I wouldn't want a team named after something that personally offends me on that level. So I have no qualms with them changing their name. With the Cleveland Indians, I mean, I was listening to somebody and they made it make a lot more sense to me, right? Because nobody really wants to change the name of the baseball team here, because inherently the name is not offensive. But the logo of the team for so many years, which they changed, by the way, and that kind of gets them dragged into this conversation with Washington as far as teams that need to change their name or need to rebrand. And it looks like they're going in that direction. I don't feel that strongly about it either way. I felt more strongly about getting rid of the logo. That was obviously offensive in my opinion. But as far as changing the team name, if they do it, then, it's just calling the team a different name. I got used to calling Jacobs Field Progressive Field and Cleveland Browns Stadium First Energy Stadium. So the team name being changed really ain't going to be that big of a deal to me. But that's just my opinion on that situation. But thank you for the question, Giants Nation. The next question comes from Savan Vihar, who says, do you think they'll even play football? I mean, if you asked me this question a month ago or 2 months ago, I would have said, yeah, I see no reason why it's not going to go down. Right now, it feels like we're dangerously heading back into the same place that we were when this whole lockdown situation started. And that has me more concerned about the possibility of a football season. And also given the fact that I think the NFL's really wasted an opportunity here to ensure that they can have a season by dragging their feet on some of these protocols and kind of just having this laissez-faire wait-and-see approach that I don't think has been helpful, quite honestly. I think the fact that the negotiations about this have only just started in the last few weeks with the Players Association shows they've been dragging their feet. And I don't think that's going to have great results. This reminds me a lot about how baseball kind of dragged their feet in that whole situation, and baseball's been a complete mess trying to get back on track and start their season. So I am concerned about that. At the end of the day, do I definitively think there'll be a season? I have no idea. If 2020 has taught me anything, is that I don't know a single thing that's going to go down at a single moment. It's just been too random and too unpredictable at this point for me to sit here and confidently tell you one way or another if they're going to have a season. I know for my job, I have to prepare as if there's going to be a season until there's not, but I also have to have some contingencies if there's not. But I hope there's a season for obvious reasons. I'm not cheering against there being a season in any capacity. I need there to be a season. But if it doesn't happen, I understand it. In the direction that we're going right now, it's becoming more and more of a possibility that I think I have to prepare myself for, and I think NFL fans in general are going to have to prepare themselves for. And a delay to the season, I think it's going to be inevitable at this point. Again, these things change from month to month, and it's very hard to predict. So I can't say from sitting here in July what's going to happen in September, but I can say from sitting here in July, I'm not confident about anything that's going to happen in August happening on time or as scheduled at all, especially with the lack of parameters and contingencies and just a plan in general that the NFL has at this point. I just don't think this is a situation that's going to go smoothly, and I think it's partly and mostly to do with just poor planning by the NFL. That's my thoughts on that whole situation. Again, I hope there's football. I love football more than a lot of things on this earth, so I really do hope there's football and there's a way to do it safely and responsibly. But I can't sit here right now in the middle of July and tell you that I'm confident that this whole thing is going to go down as planned. But that's my thoughts on the situation. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you for asking these questions. Don't forget to subscribe, be notified, and hit that like button.